Chapter 12. Concerning the Quendi and their mode of life and growth. This is a very clear manuscript written in black nib pen on 16 sides of 8 unlined sheets that Tolkien numbered in red ballpoint pen, 1 to 14, with 2 unnumbered sides of tables at the end. These sheets were then clipped together with a torn half sheet as a cover title page. Some corrections and highlights were made by Tolkien in red ballpoint pen. It dates to c. 1959. The text closely follows the beginning of the text presented here as Chapter 5, Natural Youth and Growth of the Quendi, above until that text reaches the table of mortal equivalences of elvish ages. Concerning the Quendi in their mode of life and growth, especially as compared with men. 1. Youth and aging of the Quendi. When the Quendi were young in Arda, during the earliest generations before the Great March, and especially in the first 6 generations after their awakening, they were far more like men. Their horoar bodies were in great vigor and dominant, and the delights of the body of all kinds were their chief concern. Asterisk. Though they were, from their awakening, also immediately concerned with linguistic expression, at first in especial of their delight and joy in Arda, and of their love for their spouses. And asterisk. Footnote 1. With this footnote, cf. Chapter 8, Elder and Traditions Concerning the Awakening, above. End footnote. Their Fëanor spirits were only beginning to wake fully, and to grow in knowledge of their latent powers and of their preeminence. Thus, as was indeed at first necessary, and so ordained for them, they were in their early generations far more concerned with love and the begetting of children than was so later. Moreover, the engendering of children was then less costly to their vigor or youth. It was not that their natural span of growth in life was different, but that in their early days they used it differently. The natural life of the Quendi was to grow quickly, according to their kind, to bodily maturity, and then to endure in full vigor for many years until the emotions and desires of their Fëanor became dominant and their horoar waned. The Quendian growth in life may be compared with that of men, so long as it is remembered that a. its rate of expenditure was far slower than a human, especially after achievement of maturity, and b. that when the Quendi spoke of their bodies waning, it did not mean that these became decrepit or that they felt the oncoming of senility or death. The Eldar distinguished between Olmie and Coivi. The former was the period of process of their growth from conception to maturity of body, and was achieved 12 times as rapidly as the Coivi. This latter was the process of living or enduring in Arda, and of acquiring skill, knowledge, and wisdom. The Olmie was achieved at a rate equaling 12 loa or sun years to 1 loa of human life. An elvish growth year, or Olmen, was therefore 12 sun years. Thus, from conception to birth, they grew in the womb 9 loa. When born, they continued to grow at this rate until maturity of body. The Coivi then proceeded at a rate 12 times as slow, so that 144 loa or sun years may be more or less equated so far as change or alteration are concerned. Crossnote. This rate of change is not concerned at all with the perception of time. The Quendi did not live or perceive or act slowly. On the contrary, they perceived more swiftly and minutely, and acted more quickly than men. End crossnote. Footnote 2. Regarding the perception of time, cf. Chapters 4, Timescales above, and 20, Time and its perception below. End footnote. With 1 year of human adult life. This length of time was the yen or elvish year, or koimen, as the measure of age. Elf men reached maturity at about 24, that is, after 24 Olmendi, or 2 yeni, 288 loa. Elf women reached maturity normally after 18 Olmendi, or 1.5 yeni, 216 loa. Asterisk. This rate was in some individuals rather slower and might take up to 21 Olmendi, or 252 loa. Concerning this difference between men and women, the Eldar speak in the legend of the awakening, which they called a Kuimianyana, QV, see Chapter 8, Elder and Traditions Concerning the Awakening above. And asterisk. Footnote 3. In this footnote, the phrase between men and women is a later insertion in red ballpoint pen. And footnote. After this, their youth, Vinyare, or the time of their full bodily vigor, endured for both sexes for about 72 Quendi or Yeni after maturity. That is, it lasted until elf men were of age 24 plus 72 or 96, and elf women were of age 18 plus 72 or 90, but expressed in years or lower, that is, 288 plus 10,368 or 10,656 years for males, and 216 plus 10,368 or 10,584 for females. The arrival at maturity was recognized at once by individuals and occurred with little variation. It was in times of peace recognized also by the elvish families and communities and honored with ceremony, part of which was the announcement of the Esekilme, or personal choice of name. Footnote 4. With the Esekilme, cf. X 2:14-15, 2:17, 2:29. And footnote. But the beginning of the waning at the end of youth was hardly observable, and was also more variable. Its chief mark, indeed, was the ending of any desire for the begetting or bearing of children, but not of the physical potency until many years had passed. Its approach and process was variable for many reasons. It differed naturally according to the vigor and constitution and character of individuals. Also, among the Quendi, it was much influenced by begetting and by childbirth. In this, say the Eldar, more of their youth is expended than is the case with men, and for elf men, they say that each child costs as much as one koimen or life year, but for elf women as much as or more than 2 koimendi. So that for the parents of 6 children, the waning or passing of youth might come 6 life years sooner for the father, but for the mother 12 life years sooner or more. Other special expenditures such as grief, long and arduous travel, great craft labors, and especially the bodily recovery from grave wounds and hurts, might also hasten the waning. It is said that the dreadful year, 1 Yen, the journey of the exiles from Valinor over the grinding ice to Balerion, affected those of the Noldor who endured it as greatly as 3 normal life years. But these expenditures are not, as they are not either in reckoning human ages taken into account in computing the age of any given elf. As we may say that 2 men are both 60 years old, though one may be weaker or more worn than the other, so of the Quendi we may give their ages in Olmendi and Koimendi and take no account of the chances of their lives. As for the begetting and bearing of children, this might naturally begin as soon as maturity was achieved. So it was in the beginning of the Quendi, but soon the other commanding interests of their being, as the fare of work, began to occupy their thoughts even in earliest youth. After the first 2 generations, that is 3, including the first elves, the begetting of children by elf men was postponed beyond the age of 24, little by little until soon the age of 48, asterisk, i.e. 24 Olmendi plus 24 Koimendi, and asterisk, became the most usual for the beginning of fatherhood. Later it was often delayed until the age of 60. It could naturally occur at any time up to the end of youth at about age 96, but later than this a first begetting seldom occurred. In the case of elf women, marriage and childbearing tended always to take place earlier than for elf men. For elf women were as a rule more eager for motherhood, and until the waning of youth, less distracted or deeply engrossed in other pursuits of mind or in crafts. In the earliest generations, the first child was often born before they were of age 20. Later, indeed, as with elf men, the date of the first childbirth was often delayed, and first childbirth often took place at age 36. Crossnote, i.e. 18 Olmendi plus 18 Koimendi. And crossnote. It could, of course, take place later. In days of trouble and wandering or of war, the producing of children was naturally avoided or postponed, and since this postponement, especially of the first child, prolonged the youth of the Quendi, Childbirth might in such cases occur up to a female age of 72, 18 Olmendi plus 54 Koimendi. These states, at any rate in the early ages with which these ancient histories are concerned, were not so much a matter of physical vigor or potency as of will or desire. As soon as they were full grown and with increasing rapidly after the age of 60, double cross note, this is, after 36 Koimendi for elf men, 42 for elf women, and double cross note. In either sex, the Fea and its interests began to dominate those of the Heroa. An elf who had not yet become married, or had at least not found a desired spouse by that age, 60, was likely, in normal circumstances, to remain unwedded. Footnote: it sometimes happened that a lover, failing to find a response in the desired spouse, would remain unwed, and later, maybe long after, would fall in love again and wed much later than usual. End footnote. The number of children produced by a married pair was again naturally affected by the characters, mental and physical, of the persons concerned, but also by various accidents of life, and by the age at which the marriage began, especially the age of the elf woman. Even in the earliest generations after the awakening, more than 6 children was very rare, and the average number soon, as the vigor of Heroar and Feyar began more and more to be applied to other expenditures, was reduced to 4. 6 children were never attained by those wedding after ages 48 for elf men and 36 for elf women. In the later ages, 2nd and 3rd, 2 children were usual. In the early generations, the Quendi seem to have arranged their lives normally so as to have a continuous time of the children, or ona lume, until their desires were fulfilled, and, as they said, the generation was complete. This was still often the case with married pairs later, if they lived in times of peace and could control their own lives, but it was not always done, and in the later ages children might be born after long and irregular intervals. This often depended upon the circumstances of the parents, for at all times the Quendi desired to dwell in company with husband or wife during the bearing of a child and during its early youth. For these years were one of chief joy to them, and longest and dearest held in memory. Footnote 5. Cf. X 2:13. End footnote. So that the Quendi did not wed, or if wedded, did not engender children in troublous times or perils, if these could be foreseen. After a childbirth, the time of repose was always taken, and this again tended to increase in length. Asterisk. During this time, elf women went usually into retirement and went abroad little. And asterisk. This time, being concerned mainly with bodily refreshment, was reckoned in growth years, or olmendi. It was seldom less than 1 olmen, or 12 loar, but it might be much more. Unusually, but not necessarily, it was progressively increased after each birth of a continuous onalume in such series as loar 12, 18, 24, 30, 36, or often 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, or in the case of smaller families 12, 30, 48, 66. But these series are only averages or formulated examples. In practice, the intervals were more variable. They normally occupied some exact number of loar, since conception and therefore birth 9 loar later was nearly always in spring, but they were not necessarily in exact 12s or 6s, nor in regular progression. A completed generation, or onalume, of 6 children could thus, in theory, occupy at minimum 114 loar. That is, 6 times 9 generations plus 5 times 12 intervals. This was naturally rare. At the theoretic maximum, it might occupy the whole time between maturity of the mother, 18, to the end of her youth, 90 or 72 yeni, i.e. 10,368 loar. But this never occurred. So great an interval as this average of over 2,060 loar never occurred, and in cases where large families were engendered, the intervals were seldom greater than 1 koimen, or life year 144 loar. 6 koimendi was in fact the longest interval found in the early histories, except in Amman, where waning was retarded, and an interval of 12 koimendi occasionally recorded. In the early ages before the Great March, an onalume of several children, 654, seems usually to have occupied about 1 koimen, equivalent to 1 valiant year or 144 loar, from first birth to last birth, that is, 144 plus 9 loar from the beginning of the generation with the first conception to the last birth. The Quendi never fell as a race, not in the sense in which they and men themselves believed that the second children had fallen. Footnote 6. With the unfallen state of elves, cf. chapters 5, Natural Youth and Growth of the Quendi, and 6, The Awaking of the Quendi above. With the fallen nature of men, in elvish and mannish thought, cf. the Athrabeth Finrod a Andreth in Morgoth's Ring, and chapter 10, Notes on Ori in part 2 of this book. See also The Fall of Man in Appendix 1. End footnote. Being tainted with the marring, which affected all the flesh of Arda, from which the Heroar were derived and were nourished. Footnote 7. With the marring of Arda and the consequent tainting of the flesh of Arda, cf. 10.399 to 401. End footnote. And having also come under the shadow of Melkor before their finding and rescue, they could individually do wrong. But they never, not even the wrongdoers, rejected Eru, nor worshipped either Melkor or Sauron as a god, neither individually or as a whole people. Their lives, therefore, came under no general curse or diminishment, and their primeval and natural lifespan as a race, by doom coextensive with the remainder of the life of Arda, remained unchanged in all their varieties. Of course, the Quendi could be terrorized and daunted in the remote past before the finding, or in the dark years of the Avari after the departure of the Eldar, or in the histories of the Silmarillion. They could be deceived, and they could be captured and tormented and enslaved. Then, under force and fear, they might do the will of Melkor or Sauron, and even commit grave wrongs. But they did so as slaves who nonetheless in heart knew and never rejected the truth. There is no record of any elf ever doing more than carrying out Melkor's orders under fear or compulsion. None ever called him master or lord, or did any evil act uncommanded to obtain his favor. Thus, though the carrying out of evil commands, quite apart from the sufferings of slavery and torment, clearly exhausted the youth and life vigor of those unfortunate elves who came under the power of the shadow, this evil and diminishment was not heritable. The lives of the Quendi also cannot be supposed to have been affected by living under the sun in Middle-earth. As now is known and recognized in the histories, the sun was part of the original structure of Arda, and not devised only after the death of the trees. The Quendi were therefore designed in nature to dwell in Middle-earth under the sun. The situation in Aman requires some consideration. It appears that in Aman the Quendi were little affected in their modes of growth, Omye, and life, Koivie. How was that so? In Aman, the Valar maintained all things in bliss and health, and corporeal living things, such as plants and beasts, appear to have aged or changed no quicker than Arda itself. A year to them was a valiant year, but even its passage brought them no near to death, or not visibly and appreciably, not until the end of Arda itself would the withering appear. Or so it is said. But it seems that there was no general law of time governing all things in Aman. Each living thing, individually and not only each kind or variety of living things, was under the care of the Valar and their attendant Maiar. Footnote 8. For Maiar, a seldom used form of the name Maiar, see in 11 to chapter 7, the March of the Quendi above. And footnote. Each was maintained in some form of beauty or use, for the Valar and for one another. This plant might be allowed to ripen to seed, and that plant be maintained in blossom. Footnote 9. As previously mentioned, the cover, title page of this bundle is a torn half sheet. This sheet appears to have originally been the same size and nature as the other sheets in this bundle before being torn roughly in half. The verso of the sheet demonstrates that it was in fact extracted from a prior version of this text, as on it is written, in the same hand and with the same ink and instrument as the rest of the bundle, passages clearly related to this discussion of the situation in Aman. The elvish rate of life or aging, Coevier, was the same as the Valiant being designed to endure with Arda. No difference, therefore, was discoverable in the process of the Coevier of the Quendi in Aman. But Aman had, inevitably, an effect on their Omie, or process of growth, which would be felt by all those not yet adult or entering it or later born there. In Aman, by the act of the Valar, all living things, such as beasts and plants with corporeal forms, were unaltered in these forms, but used the Valiant year as the equivalent of 1 year in their growth, natural to each kind. Thus a flower whose nature in Middle-earth was to grow from a seed sown in the autumn, to appear in the next spring and reach its full. The text ends here, mid-sentence at the bottom of the sheet. And footnote. This beast might walk in the strength and freedom of its youth, another might find a mate and bring up its young. Asterisk. And of course, since Aman was limited, some things must pass away, while perennial balance of the whole was maintained. But this was not confused with death. And asterisk. Now it is possible, though not certain, crossnote, that is, it is not certain that they could alter the constitution of any creature housing a Fea and having its own independent center of being, one of the same status in relation to Eru as their own being, even if or less might. And crossnote, that the Valar could have graced or blessed the Eldar, singly or as a whole, in like manner, but they did not do so, for though they had, wisely or not, transported them to Aman to save them from Melkor, they knew that they should not meddle with the children, or attempt to change their natures, or dominate them in any way, or rest their being, in Heroa or Fea, to any other mode than that in which Eru had designed them. The only effect of residence in Aman upon the Eldar seems to have been this. In the bliss and health of Aman, their bodies remained in vigor, and were able to support the great growth in knowledge and ardor of their spirits, without any appreciable waning, except in very special cases, such as that of Miriel. Those who entered Aman from without or by birth will leave it in the same health and vigor as they had to begin with. This slower rate of growth and of aging natural to the Quendi, as compared with men, has nothing to do with the perception or use of time. This was primarily of the Fea, whereas growth and aging were of the Heroa. The Eldar say of themselves, and it may be in some degree true also of men, that when persons, in whole being, Fea and Heroa, footnote 10, see body and spirit in Appendix 1, and footnote, are fully occupied with things that are of deep concern to their true natures, and are therefore of great interest and delight to them, time seems to pass quickly and not the reverse. That is, the full and minutely divided employment of time does not make it seem longer than the same period passed in less activity or in idleness, but shorter. It is not with time as it might be with a road or path. If this were closely and minutely inspected, it would take long to traverse, and would maybe seem to be itself of greater length, for that inspection could only be carried out by slowing the rate of normal travel. But the Fea may quicken its speed of thought and action and achieve more, or attend more minutely to events, in one space of time than in another. Thus the Quendi did not, and do not, live slowly, moving ponderously like tortoises while time flickers past them and their sluggish limbs and thoughts. Indeed, they move and think swifter than men, and achieve more than any man in any given length of time. But they have a far greater native vitality and energy to draw upon, so that it takes and will take a very great length of years to expend it. However, they were from the beginning, and so still remain, close kin of men, the second children, and their actions, desires, and talents are akin, as are their modes of perception and thought. They do not think and act in ways unobservable or actually incomprehensible to men. To a man, elves appear to speak rapidly but with clarity and precision, unless they a little retard their speech for men's sake. to move quickly and featly unless in urgency, or much moved or eager in their work when the movement of their hands, for instance, become too swift for human eyes to follow closely. Only their perception and their thought and reasoning seems normally beyond human rivalry in speed. The main text ends here, but on the following and last sheet, Tolkien drew up 2 tables for numerical aid. I give the first here in full. Some tables for reckoning approximate equivalents of elvish age to human terms. Olmendi growth years. 1 Olmend equals 12 Loar sun years. 12 Olmendi equals 1 Valiant year equals 1 Koimen equals 1 Yen equals 144 Loar. Koimendi life years. 1 Koimen equals 12 Olmendi equals 144 Loar. Gestation, or Kopamarie. 3/4 Olmen equals 9 Loar. Maturity, Contolie, achieved for males, and 24 Olmendi equals 288 Loar for females, and 18 Olmendi, asterisks, sometimes delayed up to 21 Olmendi equals 252 Loar. 18 Olmendi equals 216 Loar. End of youth naturally is, if not hastened, or more seldom retarded, achieved for both sexes in 72 Koimendi from maturity equals 10,368 Loar. The end of youth thus came for an elf man after 74 Koimendi equals 10,656 Loar, for an elf woman after 73.5 Koimendi minus 10,584 Loar. The second table calculates the total number of Loar for the Koimendi from 1 to 80, being 144 to 11,520 in 144-year increments. To the end of this table, Tolkien appended a note. An elf ages from 22 to 24 life years, i.e. 3,168 to 3,456 Loar, in each age of Arda. Usually in the first 6 generations after their awakening, they were far more like men. Their Horoar